The rain fell hard on the windshield, tapping like tiny hammers. Evelyn Carter sat in the passenger seat of her son's luxury car, staring at him, almost not recognizing the man behind the wheel. Daniel, her only child, once loving, once gentle, now spoke with a voice that felt cold, sharp, and full of resentment. "You need to learn respect, Mother," he said, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Evelyn was 65. She had lived through many storms in her life, but this storm was different. It wasn't the thunder outside that scared her. It was her own son, the boy she had raised, now looking at her as if she was nothing more than an enemy. They had just come from Richard's grave, her late husband, Daniel's father. For 3 years, every anniversary, they had gone together. It should have been a moment of shared grief and love. But instead, it had turned into another heated argument. The argument was about the company Carter Motors. The company that Richard and Evelyn had built with their bare hands, their sweat, their endless nights of planning. The empire that gave Daniel a future. But now, Daniel dismissed her opinions as outdated. He accused her of questioning his decisions, undermining his leadership, and interfering in matters she didn't understand. "Pull over, Daniel," Evelyn said firmly, though inside her stomach twisted. "We'll talk about this later, when both of us are calmer." "There's nothing to discuss," Daniel snapped, his voice sharp like glass. Beside him sat Lucas Grant, his new chief financial officer. Always quiet, always polished. Lucas wore the face of a man who seemed trustworthy. But Evelyn had hated him from the start. There was something predatory in his eyes, hidden behind fake charm and smooth words. The car swerved suddenly, pulling onto the shoulder of the wet highway. Water splashed up around the tires as Daniel braked hard. Evelyn frowned. "What are you doing?" Daniel unlocked the doors without looking at her. His voice came flat, emotionless. "Get out." Evelyn froze. "What?" "Get out of the car," he repeated. She stared at him in disbelief. "Daniel, it's pouring rain. We're miles from anywhere." "You can't be serious. Maybe some time to think will help you," he said with a tone that cut deep. A tone that made her feel like a confused old woman instead of the strong co-founder she had always been. "You need to understand you're not in control anymore." Lucas finally spoke, his smooth voice dripping with false concern. "Daniel, maybe this isn't." But Daniel cut him off sharply. "No, she needs to learn." Out now, Evelyn realized there was no point in arguing further. Her son's mind was poisoned. Arguing would only push him farther. So, with quiet dignity, she gathered her purse, unbuckled her seatbelt, and opened the door. The cold rain hit her instantly, soaking through her jacket. She stepped onto the muddy roadside, shivering, but she held her head high. "You'll regret this," she whispered, not as a threat, but as a simple truth. Daniel's only reply was to press the gas. The car sped off, spraying dirty water onto her as it disappeared down the road. The red taillights vanished into the gray storm, leaving her standing alone in the rain. For 3 long years since Richard's death, Evelyn had watched Daniel change. Slowly, steadily under Lucas's influence, he had turned into someone she barely recognized. At first, she told herself it was grief. Then she told herself it was stress, responsibility, the heavy weight of leadership. But now, watching him abandon her so cruelly, she could no longer deny the truth. Her son had become a stranger. The road was empty in both directions. No cars, no people, and no cell signal out here in the forest. Evelyn walked to a large pine tree for a little shelter. Though the rain still dripped through the branches, she wasn't afraid of the rain. She wasn't even afraid of the isolation. What truly frightened her was something much deeper. The fact that her son could leave her like this, without a second thought. 10 minutes passed. The storm hammered on, steady and relentless. Evelyn stood in silence, her clothes heavy with water, her hair sticking to her face. Then she heard it, the deep rumble of an engine. Not Daniel's sleek car, but something heavier, rougher. A black pickup truck slowed down beside her. Its wipers moved back and forth against the storm. The passenger window rolled down, and a voice called out, Need a ride, Mrs. Carter? Evelyn's eyes widened. She hadn't seen that face in nearly 2 years. It was Mark Lawson. Once, he had been Richard's most trusted man. Back in their special operations days, Mark and Richard had shared a bond that went deeper than friendship. Later, Mark had served as head of security for Carter Motors. Reliable, brave, loyal. But why was he here? Mark? Evelyn said in disbelief. What are you doing here? Mark offered a small, steady smile. Let's get you out of the rain first. Then I'll explain. Evelyn hesitated, suspicion rising, but the storm left her no choice. She climbed into the warm truck, and Mark handed her a towel. She pressed it against her face, drying her dripping hair. This isn't a coincidence, she said quietly. No, ma'am, Mark admitted, his eyes fixed on the road as he pulled back onto the highway. Your husband asked me to keep an eye on you. He thought there might come a time when you'd need backup. Evelyn's heart clenched. Richard's been gone for 3 years. Not constantly, Mark said. But I've been watching the situation at Carter Motors. And your son's new friend Lucas has a history. A history he's worked hard to cover up. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with her soaked clothes. Tell me everything. Mark nodded. Richard suspected something was wrong with Daniel before he passed. He asked me to investigate quietly. And I did. I've been collecting information ever since. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small USB drive and handed it to her. It's all here. Daniel's gambling debts, his risky investments, the money he's borrowed from dangerous people. And Lucas? He's made a career out of targeting vulnerable executives and taking over their companies. Your husband had already started gathering proof before his heart gave out. Evelyn's hand shook slightly as she clutched the drive. Why didn't Richard tell me? He wanted to, but only once he had everything, Mark said. He didn't want to burden you with suspicions. He made me promise to watch over you and be ready when the time came. Evelyn turned to the rain-streaked window, watching the blurred trees rush by. She felt something shift inside her. A hardening. A resolve she hadn't felt since her days alongside Richard, when every challenge was met with strategy and strength. Daniel thinks he taught me a lesson today, she said at last, her voice low but firm. But he's the one who's about to learn something. Mark glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. So, what's our next move? Evelyn straightened in her seat. First, take me home. I need dry clothes. Then, we're going to Richard's old study. There are documents there. Contingencies he put in place that Daniel knows nothing about. The truck rolled on through the storm. And inside, Evelyn Carter felt something awaken, something Daniel had long forgotten. His mother wasn't weak. She wasn't irrelevant. She wasn't someone to be cast aside. He thought he had abandoned her in the rain. But in truth, he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Evelyn's home stood tall against the storm, a place full of memories, both comforting and painful. Richard's presence still lingered in every room. For years, she had preserved his study as a shrine, untouched since his death. But tonight, that room was no longer just a memory. It would become her war room. Mark followed her inside quietly, carrying himself with the discipline of a soldier even after retirement. Evelyn, now in dry clothes with her damp hair pulled back, led him directly to Richard's study. The room smelled of leather and wood polish, just as Richard had left it. Books lined the shelves, military tokens were carefully displayed, and his large mahogany desk sat in the center like a commander's post. Evelyn's heart squeezed for a moment, but then her focus sharpened. Richard always kept things organized, she said softly. His public files were perfect. But the real records, they were hidden. Mark watched her as she walked toward a large antique globe in the corner. She pressed her hand against it, rotated it, and revealed a small keypad concealed in its base. Old habits die hard, Mark said with a faint chuckle. Indeed, Evelyn replied, typing in the code. It was their wedding anniversary followed by coordinates of the place where she and Richard had first met during a classified mission. The globe clicked, sliding open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a leather-bound ledger and a sealed envelope with Evelyn's name written in Richard's familiar handwriting. She took both items carefully, her hands trembling slightly. Richard always had backup plans, she murmured. He survived 30 years in special operations because he never stopped thinking ahead. Even after he retired, his mind was always calculating. Mark nodded. He ran the company the same way. Always assessing risks, always preparing for the worst. Evelyn opened the ledger first. Inside were pages of Richard's precise handwriting. Each page carried detailed notes, observations about Daniel's behavior over the years, records of financial transactions that looked suspicious, and profiles of people Daniel had surrounded himself with. The name that appeared most often was Lucas Grant. He saw it before I did, Evelyn whispered, her voice heavy with guilt. Richard noticed patterns others couldn't, Mark replied. About 6 months before he died, he asked me to dig into Daniel's finances. What I found disturbed us both. Evelyn turned the pages, her eyes darkening with each line. Gambling debts. Poker games. Sports betting. Risky stock trades. Millions lost. To cover it up, Daniel had borrowed money from increasingly dangerous sources. And Lucas? She asked without looking up. Lucas specializes in finding businessmen who are vulnerable. Mark explained. He swoops in, offers solutions, wins their trust, then slowly takes control. By the time they realize what's happening, it's too late. He's done this before several times. And Daniel? He was the perfect target. Desperate, reckless, and blind to the trap. Evelyn sat heavily in Richard's chair, staring at the evidence of her son's downfall. Why didn't Richard confront Daniel? Mark's voice softened. Richard's health was already failing. He worried that pushing too hard would only drive Daniel further into Lucas's hands. Instead, he focused on protecting you and the company. Evelyn finally reached for the sealed envelope. She broke the wax seal with steady hands and unfolded the letter. Richard's words leapt off the page, filled with the voice she had loved for decades. My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And you are facing the storm I feared would come. Forgive me for keeping this from you while I lived. I wanted to spare you from worry until I was certain. Our son, he is in trouble. His weakness for gambling has left him exposed. Lucas Grant, though that is not his real name, is exploiting him to take control of our company. I've prepared for this day. The documents enclosed protect both you and Carter Motors. Daniel believes he holds power. But the truth is, I structured things so you retain the final authority. Trust Mark Lawson. He has been my eyes and ears. He will be yours now. Stay strong, my love. Sometimes the hardest act of love is letting someone face consequences. Daniel may need to fall before he rises again. Forever yours. Richard. Evelyn's eyes blurred with tears as she finished reading. She held the letter against her chest for a moment, then placed it back on the desk. She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. Daniel thinks I'm just an old woman standing in his way, she said quietly. Lucas thinks I'm irrelevant. They're both wrong. Richard gave me the tools. Now it's time to use them. Mark smiled faintly. What's our first step? First, we need transparency, Evelyn replied, her voice firm. I want every detail of Daniel's debts, every transaction Lucas has touched, every asset at risk. No more shadows. I can get those records, Mark said. My old clearance at Carter Motors was never revoked. I can still access most of the systems. Good, Evelyn continued. Second, we need allies inside the company. People who've noticed something's wrong, but have been too afraid to speak up. I know just the ones, Mark said. Emily Parker from accounting. She's been tracking irregularities quietly. And William Foster, a board member. He's been asking questions. They'll help. Excellent, Evelyn said. And third, we need to know Lucas's endgame. He isn't destroying the company. He wants control. But for what? We need to find out. Mark nodded. From what I've seen, he strips companies for value, sells off assets, milks them dry, then moves on. But we'll find proof. Evelyn stood, her resolve clear in her posture. Richard built Carter Motors with honesty. I won't watch it be torn apart. Daniel abandoned me today, thinking he was teaching me a lesson. But what he really did was wake up the woman I used to be. What do you need from me? Mark asked. Everything Richard asked of you, Evelyn replied. Be my right hand. Be my eyes and ears. Let them think I'm weak. Let them think I'm beaten. While they underestimate me, we'll prepare. Mark nodded with military precision. Understood. Evelyn glanced back at Richard's chair as they left the study. For years, it had been only a reminder of loss. Now it felt like a command center. Richard knew this day might come, she said softly. He left me the tools. He trusted me to finish what he started. Mark's voice was steady. He always said you were the real strategist. He laid the foundation. Now it's your campaign to lead. Evelyn nodded once. Then let's begin. The storm outside began to break, the rain easing into a light drizzle. Dawn would come soon, and with it, the beginning of her plan. Morning sunlight streamed through Evelyn's sunroom, touching the neat stacks of financial documents spread before her. She had barely slept, her mind consumed with Richard's letter and Mark's revelations. The weight of responsibility pressed on her, but beneath it burned a sharp clarity. Mark entered with fresh coffee, every movement crisp and precise. The pattern is worse than we thought, Evelyn said, pushing papers toward him. Daniel has leveraged nearly 40% of his company shares for personal loans. Mark placed the coffee on the table. At first, the lenders were regular banks. But when that wasn't enough, he turned to less reputable sources. And guess who was behind those shell companies? Lucas. Evelyn's face tightened as she scanned the files. So Lucas loaned Daniel money through fake companies, knowing he couldn't repay. The collateral being Carter Motors shares. Exactly, Mark confirmed. When Daniel defaults, and he will, control slides straight into Lucas's hands without anyone realizing. When is the first loan due? Evelyn asked. Next month, Mark replied. Daniel doesn't have the cash to cover it. Evelyn leaned back, her eyes fixed on the window where the morning light shone on the driveway where Daniel once learned to ride his first bicycle. The memory of that boy, smiling with oil-stained hands while restoring his first car with Richard, stabbed her heart. He's still my son, she whispered. I know, Mark said gently. But he's also drowning, and Lucas is pulling him under. Richard's contingency plans weren't just for the company, they were for Daniel too. He knew this day might come. Evelyn turned back to the table. Then we must proceed carefully. We must stop Lucas, but Daniel has to face consequences too. Otherwise, he'll never learn. Mark nodded in agreement. What's the next step? Find allies, Evelyn said, pointing to the organizational chart spread before her. Emily Parker. William Foster. Quietly bring them in. We'll need their strength when the time comes. Mark's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. What about Daniel? If you suddenly change your behavior toward him, he'll notice. I'll give him exactly what he expects, Evelyn replied with a cold smile. The picture of a broken, submissive mother. Let him believe yesterday's lesson worked. The more secure Lucas and Daniel feel, the sloppier they'll get. By mid-morning, Evelyn had transformed Richard's study into her new command center. Hidden safes were opened. Secure phones were installed. Surveillance equipment was set up. The room buzzed with energy, no longer a mausoleum, but a nerve center for war. Mark returned with news. Emily will meet us tonight. She's bringing financial records she's kept hidden from company systems. As for Foster, he can't meet in person yet. Too much scrutiny from Daniel and Lucas. But he sent this. Mark handed her a message. Evelyn read it carefully. Board meeting moved up to Friday. Amendments to voting rights on the agenda. Urgent intervention needed before then. Her jaw tightened. 3 days, she murmured. That's all the time we have. What are they planning? Mark asked. They want to erase the family ownership protections Richard put in place, Evelyn explained. If they succeed, Daniel can transfer controlling interest outside the family. Straight into Lucas's hands. Mark exhaled slowly. That's the final move. Not if I get there first, Evelyn said, pulling out Richard's contingency documents. Richard created a hidden class of shares that gives me ultimate control. Daniel doesn't even know they exist. Her eyes hardened as she set the papers down. It's time to remind them who I really am. The towering glass building of Carter Motors gleamed under the midday sun. 22 stories high, it stood as a monument to Richard's hard work and vision. Evelyn had helped build it too, every corner of it carrying her fingerprint. Yet now, under Daniel's leadership, the place felt cold. Like a stranger's home. She chose not to enter through the executive entrance reserved for high-ranking staff. Instead, she walked in through the main lobby, head held high, greeting employees who had known her for years. Their smiles were respectful, genuine. It was fuel to her resolve this company was worth fighting for. On the executive floor, the receptionist blinked in surprise when Evelyn approached. Mrs. Carter, we weren't expecting you today. I thought I'd stop by and see my son, Evelyn said softly, her posture deliberately smaller, her tone subdued. Mr. Carter is in a budget meeting right now, the receptionist replied. Would you like me to let him know you're here? Oh no, that won't be necessary, Evelyn said, her smile warm but faint. I'll just wait. Is my old office still free? The receptionist hesitated. Your former office was reassigned a few months ago. But you're welcome to wait in the visitor's lounge. Of course, Evelyn said, hiding the sting. Her office, the one kept intact for years after she stepped down, was gone. Another attempt by Daniel and Lucas to erase her presence. But the lounge, with its large windows and view of the executive corridor, gave her exactly what she needed. She could see the flow of people, watch interactions, observe the new atmosphere Daniel had created. She settled into a chair, looking calm, but inside, she was watching every detail. Within 20 minutes, her patience paid off. The door to the main boardroom opened, and Daniel emerged, surrounded by executives. Lucas, as always, was at his side, his polished shoes gleaming, his smile perfectly fake. Daniel looked older than his years. Stress tightened the skin around his eyes, and his posture, though confident, carried a weight of desperation. For a moment, Evelyn glimpsed her son as a tired man trapped in consequences of his own actions. Then Daniel spotted her. His eyes flickered, in surprise, followed by the smug satisfaction of someone who thought he had already won. He excused himself from the group and walked toward her. Mother, he said, his voice carrying for others to hear. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought we should talk, Evelyn replied gently, her voice subdued. Yesterday was difficult. Daniel relaxed slightly, convinced that his lesson on the roadside had broken her spirit. Yes, let's go to my office. Lucas appeared instantly, like a shadow. Mrs. Carter, he said smoothly. Always a pleasure. Daniel, shall I reschedule your call with the Frankfurt investors? No need, Daniel said. This won't take long. The arrogance in his tone, the dismissiveness was exactly what Evelyn wanted. He saw her as weak, defeated. It was her cover. She followed them into Daniel's office, once Richard's proud corner space. It had been stripped of warmth, redesigned with cold minimalism, a sharp contrast to her husband's solid wood and family photos. Lucas lingered at the connecting door to his own office, leaving it slightly open. Evelyn noted it. He wanted to listen. Daniel sat behind the desk, taking the position of power. I trust you've had time to reflect, he said smoothly. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap, eyes lowered slightly. I realize I've been resistant to change. I only wanted to protect your father's legacy. But I understand the company must evolve. Perhaps I was wrong. Daniel leaned back, pleased. I'm glad you've come to your senses. Your interference at board meetings has been unhelpful. I only want what's best for Carter Motors, Evelyn said, her voice carrying a faint tremor. And for you, Daniel. You're still my son. Something flickered in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He opened a folder on his desk and pushed it toward her. The board meeting on Friday will be important. We're amending the bylaws to make decision-making faster, more efficient. These restrictions your generation put in place, they're outdated. Evelyn opened the folder, scanning the pages. The amendments matched what Mark had warned her about removing family ownership requirements, opening the door for Daniel to transfer control outside the family. This seems very technical, she said, pretending to be confused. I trust you've had proper legal review. The best, Daniel said confidently. Lucas has assembled a top-tier legal team. Lucas's team, not the company's longtime counsel, Evelyn noted silently. Another red flag. She closed the folder, offering a soft smile. I won't take up more of your time. I know you're busy leading the company. Daniel smiled in satisfaction. I'm glad we understand each other now. Yesterday's incident may have been unpleasant, but perhaps it was necessary. Yes, Evelyn said softly, standing. It clarified many things for me. She deliberately left her scarf draped on the chair, an excuse to return later unnoticed. Will you be home for dinner? Maybe we could continue rebuilding our relationship. I have a dinner at the Cardinal Club, Daniel replied, almost dismissively. Tomorrow, perhaps? The Cardinal Club? Evelyn asked casually. That's quite exclusive. Important clients. Strategic partners, Daniel said vaguely. Nothing you need to worry about. Evelyn nodded, hiding her satisfaction. She now had confirmation of the meeting Mark suspected. As she left, she took note of who watched her in the hall. Which employees' eyes carried sympathy, which carried fear. The company culture had shifted, and not for the better. Outside, in the safety of her car, Evelyn called Mark. It's confirmed. Cardinal Club. Tonight. They're finalizing before Friday's meeting. Understood, Mark replied. I searched Daniel's home office. His laptop had months of communication with Lucas, plans, debts, everything. And something more, after Friday, they're planning to bring in overseas investors, names hidden. Money laundering? Evelyn asked. Possibly. The messages mention anonymity and huge sums. Daniel is nearly broke. He's desperate. Lucas stands to make millions. Evelyn gripped the steering wheel tightly. What about our meeting with Helen Brooks? Scheduled for 2 p.m., she remembers structuring Richard's contingency shares. Emily Parker will meet us there too, with financial records. Good, Evelyn said. And Mark? Keep eyes on the Cardinal Club tonight. I want to know exactly who Lucas is bringing in. Already in motion, Mark assured her. And one more thing. After you left Daniel's office, Lucas made a call. He said you appeared subdued, no longer a threat. His exact words, she's broken. Proceed as planned. Evelyn's lips curved into a cold smile. Perfect. Let them believe I'm broken. It's the cover we need. Helen Brooks's office was tucked away in the old financial district, far from the glass towers of downtown. At 72, she had retired from corporate law, but still handled select clients. She welcomed Evelyn warmly. It's been too long, Helen said, embracing her. I need your expertise, Evelyn replied. Inside the private conference room, Emily Parker was already waiting, her stack of files neatly arranged. She stood nervously when Evelyn entered. Mrs. Carter, Emily said. I've been tracking irregularities, but I didn't know who to trust. You did the right thing, Evelyn reassured her. Richard always said you were meticulous. That's why he put you in that position. Mark locked the door and activated the privacy system. Helen spread legal documents across the table. James has briefed me. Lucas is orchestrating a hostile takeover with Daniel as his tool. But fortunately, Richard planned for this. She pulled out a set of papers. The contingency shares. Class B hidden, but fully legal. They give you controlling interest, Evelyn. You can remove Daniel as CEO anytime. Emily leaned forward in awe. These shares don't appear on any financial statements. They wouldn't, Helen explained. They were exempt from disclosure until activated. Richard was very clear. Evelyn studied the documents. And activating them? I've already prepared the filings, Helen said. Once signed, you take control. Mark nodded. That would solve the problem. No, Evelyn said firmly. Not yet. Removing Daniel now only treats the symptom. Lucas will run to another company. Daniel will never learn. We need them both to reveal their full plan. Then we strike. Helen studied her. That's risky. It's necessary, Evelyn said. Lucas believes unfinished. That's our weapon. Emily opened her files nervously. I've documented everything: fake consulting contracts, inflated acquisitions, manipulated inventory. This isn't just poor management. It's fraud. Evelyn accepted the USB drive. Good work, Emily. This evidence will protect the company, and it will expose Lucas. What about Daniel? Helen asked. Evelyn's voice hardened. He will face consequences. But I won't destroy him. He's still my son. Lucas is the real enemy. Helen sat back, studying Evelyn with respect. Richard was right about you. You were always the strategist. Evelyn looked out the window at the city skyline. Then it's time to prove it. Tonight, we watch the Cardinal Club. By Friday, we end this. The Cardinal Club sat high above the city, on the top floor of a luxury hotel. It was the kind of place where billionaires and politicians whispered secrets over expensive wine, where business deals shaped the future of entire industries. To most, it was untouchable. But tonight, Evelyn Carter had eyes inside. Mark Lawson had prepared everything. Disguises, listening equipment, and a cover story that would let them blend into the background. Evelyn, dressed in a sleek black evening gown with her hair pinned elegantly, looked every bit the part of a wealthy widow keeping up social appearances. To anyone watching, she was harmless, someone who enjoyed fine dining but no longer held influence. Remember, Mark whispered as they stepped into the marble-floored lobby. We're ghosts tonight. We don't act, we don't intervene. We watch, we listen. Evelyn gave a small nod. Her nerves were steady, her mind focused. She had lived through darker nights, standing beside Richard in war zones, negotiating under pressure, watching enemies circle. Compared to those days, this was familiar terrain. The Mater D greeted them warmly. Mark's cover identity as a retired colonel with foreign investments gave them credibility. Within minutes, they were escorted to a table with a perfect line of sight to the private dining rooms. Through the glass, Evelyn spotted Daniel. He looked restless, fiddling with his cufflinks, his drink untouched. Lucas sat beside him, calm as ever, his smile calculated. And across from them were three men Evelyn had never seen before: sharp suits, foreign accents, the type who carried danger in the way they moved. Do we know who they are? Evelyn asked softly. Mark adjusted the tiny earpiece in his ear. Working on it. James still has contacts in Interpol. We'll get names. They listened closely as the small listening device hidden in Evelyn's forgotten scarf still on the chair in Daniel's office picked up sound from Lucas's phone. Lucas was careless, leaving his line open while he texted instructions. Investment secured. Transfer through Luxembourg account. Family control neutralized Friday. Evelyn's stomach tightened. This wasn't just about Carter Motors. It was international money laundering, using her family's company as the shell. Inside the dining room, Lucas lifted his glass. Gentlemen, by this time next week, Carter Motors will be fully under our command. Daniel here has ensured the transition will be smooth. One of the foreigners, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, raised an eyebrow. And the mother? Does she not hold influence still? Daniel flushed slightly. She's no longer an obstacle. Evelyn felt the sting, but she forced her face to stay calm. This was the mask she had chosen. Lucas leaned in, his smile sharp. Mrs. Carter is an elderly woman stuck in the past. I assure you she poses no threat. Mark's jaw tightened, but Evelyn placed a calming hand on his. Let them underestimate me, she whispered. The meeting stretched on, filled with coded phrases and veiled threats. Evelyn caught enough to understand. Lucas had promised these men access to Carter Motors' global supply chain. A perfect cover for moving money and goods discreetly,
Finally, Daniel excused himself to the restroom.
Evelyn seized the moment. She rose from her seat gracefully, murmuring to Mark, "Stay here." She walked casually toward the powder room, but instead of entering, she slipped into the hallway connecting to the men's side. There she caught Daniel alone, leaning against the wall, rubbing his temples. "Daniel," she said softly. He jerked in surprise. "Mother, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for dinner," Evelyn said smoothly. "You know I have friends at the Cardinal." Imagine my surprise seeing you here with strangers. Daniel's face darkened. "You shouldn't be snooping." "I wasn't," she said gently, lowering her voice. "I was simply concerned." "You look tired, son." "You don't seem yourself." For a brief second, the hardened mask cracked. His eyes showed fear. "Not of her, but of the men in the other room. They're not people you cross-mothered," he muttered. "I don't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Evelyn replied softly. "Richard taught you that." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You don't understand. If I don't deliver, they'll ruin me. They'll ruin all of us. Or maybe," Evelyn said carefully, "they already are." Before he could answer, Lucas appeared, his smile sharp as ever.
"Ah, Mrs. Carter. What a pleasant coincidence."
"Daniel, the gentlemen are waiting." He slipped an arm around Daniel's shoulder, steering him away. His eyes flicked toward Evelyn, cold and calculating, but still dismissive. Back at her table, Mark gave her a look. "That was risky. I needed to see where Daniel stands," Evelyn said quietly. "He's scared." "Lucas is using his fear. That's leverage we can use." Mark nodded slowly. "Then we tighten the net." The next morning, Evelyn sat in Richard's study, the documents spread before her. Emily Parker had joined them again, her hands trembling slightly as she handed over new files. "These payments," Emily explained, pointing to highlighted entries, were disguised as consulting fees. "But the recipients trace back to shell companies tied to Lucas. It's deliberate fraud." Evelyn nodded. "And when this comes out, Daniel will be implicated." Emily swallowed hard. "Yes, unless he helps expose it. That's the key," Evelyn said firmly. "We don't just stop Lucas. We give Daniel a path to redeem himself. If he chooses to take it." Mark leaned over the table. "And if he doesn't?" Evelyn's eyes hardened. "Then he faces the full consequences." That afternoon, she arranged a quiet meeting with William Foster, the board member Mark had mentioned. They met in his private townhouse, far from corporate ears. "Evelyn," Foster said warmly, "it's good to see you." "I've been worried." "Then you know what's happening," Evelyn replied. Foster nodded gravely. "Lucas has too much influence. Daniel's become reckless. The board is uneasy, but no one wants to challenge him directly. They won't have to," Evelyn said. Vivalin said, sliding Richard's contingency documents across the table. "I have control shares. When the time comes, I'll use them. But I need the board ready to support the transition." Foster studied the papers, then looked at her with respect. "Richard planned well. Tell me what you need." "Time," Evelyn said. 3 days. On Friday, when they try to strip the bylaws, I'll act. Until then, not a word." Foster nodded. "You have my support." That night, Evelyn sat alone in her bedroom, staring at Richard's photograph. She remembered his laughter, his steady hand on hers, his voice telling her, "You're stronger than you know." "Richard," she whispered, "he's lost, but he's still our son. Help me guide him back." Her phone buzzed. It was Mark. "We've identified the men from the Cardinal Club. One's connected to a Russian syndicate. Another to illegal arms trading. The third offshore banking. These aren't investors. They're criminals." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "Then Lucas is worse than we thought. This isn't just about our family. If Carter Motors falls into their hands, it becomes a tool for international crime." Mark's voice was grim. "Which means Friday isn't just about saving a company. It's about stopping something much bigger." Evelyn tightened her grip on the phone. "Then we can't fail." She looked back at Richard's photo, her heart steady. Daniel thinks he left me broken in the rain, she said softly.
But the truth is, he gave me fire. And with that fire, she prepared for the battle ahead. Friday was only 2 days away.
The company board would meet, and Lucas planned to push through the bylaw changes that would hand him control. Evelyn knew that timing was everything. She couldn't reveal her cards too soon. But if she waited too long, Lucas would win. In Richard's study, the command center buzzed with quiet preparation.
Mark worked with military precision, checking surveillance feeds from hidden cameras he had planted around Carter Motors headquarters. Emily organized her spreadsheets and cross-referenced files,
her fingers flying across the keyboard. Evelyn stood at the desk, calm but sharp,
like a general before battle.
Lucas is confident, Mark said, scanning his monitor.
He thinks you're out of the way.
Daniel believes he's finally free from your shadow.
That's their weakness, and we'll use it,
Evelyn replied. She picked up the sealed folder Helen Brooks had given her, the legal documents that activated Richard's contingency shares. Just her signature was enough to reclaim control. It was tempting to end it all now. But her son's face lingered in her mind. The fear in his eyes at the Cardinal Club, the desperation in his voice when he whispered, "I don't have a choice."
She set the folder back down.
We wait, not until Lucas exposes himself fully. Only then. Mark glanced at her. That's a gamble. So is building this company, Evelyn replied. Richard taught me the value of patience. The next morning, Evelyn decided to test Daniel. She called his office, her voice gentle, motherly. Daniel, would you have time for lunch today? There was a pause on the line. She could hear the rustle of papers, the tension in his breath. Finally, he said, 1 o'clock. At the club downtown. But it has to be quick.
When she arrived, he was already there, sipping coffee, looking restless.
He glanced around nervously before leaning forward. Mother, you shouldn't be interfering. These are dangerous people. I'm not interfering, Evelyn said softly. I'm concerned.
You're my son.
Tell me the truth, Daniel. How deep are you in? His eyes flicked down, shame clouding his face. Too deep. Millions.
I borrowed to cover gambling losses.
Lucas offered solutions. He said he could help me turn things around.
But every deal just pulled me in deeper.
Did you sign anything binding?
Evelyn asked carefully. Daniel nodded.
Loan agreements.
Transfers of shares.
If I fail, they take everything. And they don't just take politely.
Then Lucas has you trapped,
Evelyn said, her tone calm. I know, Daniel whispered, his voice breaking.
But I can't back out now.
These men. Gil ruined me. Evelyn reached across the table, placing her hand over his. Daniel, listen to me. I don't want to ruin you. I want to save you. But you have to let me help. His eyes flickered with hope for the briefest moment. But then fear returned. He pulled his hand back. If Lucas suspects I've turned against him, he'll destroy me faster.
Please, stay out of this.
Evelyn forced a sad smile. You're still my boy. You'll see, Daniel. You'll see that I'm not your enemy. She left the club knowing what she had to do. Daniel was too afraid to break free on his own. She would have to show him the truth, force him to see Lucas for what he really was. That evening,
Evelyn met with Emily and Mark again.
Emily spread out more files, her face pale.
These payments,
she said, pointing to a set of transactions, were routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands.
And the signatures authorizing them?
Daniel's. Evelyn frowned.
But Daniel doesn't know finance that well.
Did he even read what he was signing? Probably not, Emily admitted. But legally, he's on the hook. If this surfaces, it won't just be fraud. It could be criminal charges. Mark leaned forward.
Which means Lucas has leverage over him.
Do as I say, or I'll make sure you go to prison. Evelyn tapped her fingers on the desk thoughtfully. Then we expose Lucas. But we do it in a way that forces Daniel to see the truth with his own eyes. Mark raised an eyebrow. How? By turning Lucas's own arrogance against him, Evelyn said firmly. We give him just enough rope to hang himself. The next day, Evelyn staged her play. She returned to Carter Motors, once again in the role of the subdued, irrelevant widow. She visited Daniel's office carrying a small box of personal items, photos of Richard, old documents, a framed newspaper article from the company's early days.
"I thought I'd clean out my things," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough sadness to sound convincing. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but he didn't stop her.
Lucas, however, appeared in the doorway, his smile sharp. "Mrs. Carter," he said smoothly. "It's good you've accepted the new reality.
The company needs to move forward." Evelyn offered a faint smile.
"Yes, I only want peace now." Lucas studied her, his eyes narrowing briefly, but then he dismissed her. In his mind, she was no longer a threat. Perfect. She deliberately left one of Richard's old ledgers on Daniel's desk at decoy. Inside, Mark had placed a tiny recording device, disguised as a folded note.
It would capture everything. Later that night, Mark retrieved the device.
Together with Emily, they listened to Lucas and Daniel's private conversation.
"Don't worry about your mother," Lucas said smoothly.
"She's broken.
Friday we finalize, and then Carter Motors is ours.
These foreign partners will pay millions. You'll be free of debt, and I'll ensure you remain as figurehead. Everyone wins." Daniel's voice wavered.
"And if the board resists?"
"They won't," Lucas said confidently. "We control the votes. And if your mother tries to interfere, we'll show the documents she signed. The ones tying her to the fraudulent transfers. She stays silent to protect herself." Evelyn's eyes widened. "He forged my signature." Emily checked the documents. "Yes, this isn't your handwriting. But it's convincing. If made public, it would implicate you as well." Mark's jaw tightened. "Lucas isn't just after control. He's making sure you take the fall if things go south." Evelyn's expression hardened.
"Then we expose him in front of everyone."
"Daniel needs to hear it.
The board needs to hear it, and those investors need to hear it."
We turn Friday into his downfall.
The night before the board meeting, Evelyn sat once again in Richard's study.
She unfolded his letter, reading his words slowly, letting them steady her. Sometimes the hardest act of love is letting someone face consequences. She closed her eyes, whispering to the photo on the desk. "Tomorrow, Richard. Tomorrow I fight for the company, for our son, and for your legacy. Guide me." Mark entered quietly. "Everything's in place. Helen has the contingency shares ready. Emily has the evidence compiled. Foster has rallied board support. Tomorrow, it all comes together."
Evelyn looked up at him, her voice calm but resolute.
"Then tomorrow we end this." She rose from Richard's chair and walked to the window. The city lights sparkled in the distance. The very skyline Carter Motors had helped shape. "Lucas thinks I'm broken," she said softly. "Daniel thinks I'm powerless. But tomorrow, they'll both see who I really am."
Friday morning arrived with a heaviness in the air. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and every detail mattered.
Evelyn Carter woke before dawn, her mind sharp, her resolve unshakable. She dressed in a navy blue suit, professional, commanding, but understated enough not to draw attention until the right moment. She paused at Richard's photograph before leaving the house. "It's time," she whispered. "For both of us." Mark drove her downtown, every street familiar,
every turn stirring memories of the decades she and Richard had spent building Carter Motors.
Today she would fight to protect it one last time. When they arrived at headquarters, the building buzzed with tension. Executives hurried through hallways. Assistants carried stacks of papers. The scent of coffee filled the air, masking the nervous energy everyone felt. Evelyn entered the boardroom quietly. The long mahogany table stretched across the room, polished to a shine. Around it sat the board members, men and women she had known for years, though many now looked uncertain, caught between loyalty to the family and fear of Lucas's influence. Daniel sat at the head of the table, trying to project confidence, but Evelyn noticed his restless hands and the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Lucas stood beside him, smooth as ever, radiating calm authority. "Mother," Daniel said with a forced smile. I wasn't expecting you here. This is a family company, Evelyn replied, her voice even.
I thought it appropriate to attend. Lucas stepped forward, his tone polite but dismissive.
Of course, Mrs. Carter. But today's meeting concerns operational efficiency and structural amendments.
Matters you may find
technical. Evelyn returned his smile, hiding her steel. I'm sure I'll manage. The meeting began.
Lucas took the lead, presenting slides filled with numbers and graphs. His voice flowed like silk, convincing, persuasive. He spoke of modernization, streamlining, global partnerships.
He framed the bylaw changes as necessary evolution. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded. Others avoided eye contact. Finally, Lucas clicked to the last slide. In conclusion, these amendments will ensure Carter Motors remains competitive in a global market. We recommend an immediate vote. Daniel cleared his throat, glancing at his mother nervously.
Yes. Let's proceed to vote. Before anyone could speak, Evelyn rose from her chair. The room fell silent. Before we vote, she said calmly, I believe we should review all relevant information.
After all, transparency is the cornerstone of good governance.
Isn't that right, Mr. Grant?
Lucas's smile faltered slightly.
Of course. Evelyn opened her briefcase and placed a folder on the table.
Emily Parker, seated quietly at the end, handed out copies to each board member. Inside were spreadsheets, documents, and highlighted transactions. These, Evelyn continued,
are financial records showing fraudulent payments routed through shell companies tied directly to Lucas
Grant. Payments authorized under my son's signature. Murmurs rippled through the room. Daniel paled, his eyes darting to Lucas.
That's outrageous,
Lucas snapped, his mask cracking. Fabricated nonsense. Really? Evelyn said smoothly. Because here is the audio recording, taken from my office this very week. Mark pressed play on a small device. Lucas's voice filled the room. Don't worry about your mother. She's broken. Friday we finalize, and then Carter Motors is ours. Gasps filled the boardroom.
Daniel's face drained of color. Lucas's composure shattered. That recording is inadmissible.
It means nothing. Evelyn stepped closer, her gaze sharp. It means everything. You manipulated my son.
You trapped him with debts, forged documents with my signature, and promised control of this company to international criminals. The board erupted into whispers. Lucas tried to recover.
This is slander. Daniel, tell them. But Daniel's voice was shaking.
Lucas, is it true? Did you forge her signature? Lucas shot him a cold look. You're in this as deep as I am.
Don't pretend otherwise. Daniel froze, horror spreading across his face. Evelyn turned to the board. Her voice was steady, commanding. Richard and I built Carter Motors on honesty and resilience. Richard anticipated this.
He created contingency shares that give me controlling interest. Effective immediately, I am exercising that authority. Helen Brooks,
seated quietly in the corner, rose and handed the official filings to the board.
These documents are already notarized and filed with the state. Mrs. Carter
holds majority control. The room fell silent. Then William Foster, the senior board member, spoke firmly. In that case, I move that Lucas Grant be terminated immediately, pending investigation. And that Daniel Carter be suspended as CEO until further review. I second the motion. Another board member said quickly. All in favor? Foster asked. Hands went up around the table, nearly unanimous. Lucas's face turned red with fury. He slammed his hand on the table.
You think this ends me?
You don't know who you're dealing with. Two security guards, summoned by Mark earlier, stepped forward. Mr. Grant, please come with us. Lucas glared at Evelyn, his eyes burning with hatred.
This isn't over, old woman.
Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. Oh, it's over.
You just don't know it yet. The guards escorted him out.
His protests echoing down the hallway. Silence hung in the boardroom. All eyes turned to Daniel. He looked broken, his shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with shame.
Mother,
he whispered, I didn't know.
I thought I could handle it. I thought I was proving myself. Evelyn's heart ached, but her voice stayed firm.
You let pride blind you. You let fear guide you. And you let a snake wrap himself around this company. You abandoned me, Daniel, not just on that rainy road, but in this boardroom, in this family. Tears filled his eyes. I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Evelyn said quietly. You will face the consequences of your actions. But if you're willing to change, truly change, then perhaps redemption is still possible. Daniel lowered his head. Tell me what to do. First, cooperate with the investigation, Evelyn said firmly. Give the authorities everything on Lucas. Every message, every transaction. If you hold back, you go down with him. Daniel nodded shakily. Evelyn turned back to the board. Carter Motors will not fall. Richard built it too well for that.
With your support, we will restore integrity, protect our employees, and honor the legacy this company was built on. The board members applauded softly,
relief washing over their faces. The meeting adjourned.
But Evelyn remained seated for a moment, her heart heavy yet steady.
She had won the battle. But the war for Daniel's soul was far from over. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder.
Richard would be proud. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her gaze fixed on the window.
We saved the company.
Now we must save our son. That evening, Evelyn returned home, exhausted but unbroken.
The storm that had once left her standing on the side of the road now seemed far away. She had stood against betrayal, corruption, and greed, and she had prevailed.
But as she sat alone in Richard's study, her thoughts turned to Daniel. He was no longer the boy who had once fixed cars in the driveway with his father.
He was a man who had lost his way.
And it would take more than one boardroom victory to bring him back. Evelyn whispered into the quiet room.
Richard, guide me. Help me reach him. Because saving the company had been necessary. But saving Daniel, that would be the hardest fight of all. The morning after the boardroom battle,
Carter Motors felt different.
The halls buzzed with nervous whispers, but also with relief. Lucas was gone, at least from the building, though not yet from their lives. Daniel had been suspended, his office sealed, his nameplate removed.
Evelyn Carter now sat in the executive chair, not out of ambition, but out of duty. Yet victory never comes without consequences. By noon, news had spread to the media.
Headlines read, Corporate power shift at Carter Motors.
Widow of founder takes control. Reporters swarmed the front entrance,
their cameras flashing as Evelyn left for a lunch meeting. She kept her expression calm, though inside she knew this was just the beginning.
Lucas was too clever, too dangerous, to simply disappear. Back in Richard's study that night, she and Mark Lawson reviewed new intel.
Mark's contacts in law enforcement had been busy. Lucas didn't fight his removal, Mark said grimly. Instead, he slipped away.
He's covering his tracks money transfers, encrypted communications, offshore accounts.
He's preparing for a counterstrike, Evelyn nodded slowly. I expected as much. Snakes don't strike in the open. They wait in the shadows. Emily Parker, sitting across the table, looked worried. The company's finances are stable for now, but investors are nervous. Rumors are spreading. If Lucas leaks manipulated documents, he could create panic. Evelyn sighed. Then we must stay ahead of him. Transparency, clarity, truth. We control the story before he twists it. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse apartment, the silence pressing on him like a weight.
He hadn't returned to headquarters since his suspension.
The company emails had stopped. The phone calls had dried up.
For the first time in his life, he felt completely cut off. On the coffee table lay the morning paper.
His mother's face filled the front page, her eyes sharp, her presence commanding. Evelyn Carter saves Carter Motors. He buried his face in his hands.
The shame burned. It wasn't just about the company.
It was about that rainy highway, the way he had left her standing in the storm. He thought it was strength, teaching her a lesson. But it was weakness, his own fear, his own pride, twisting into cruelty. When a knock came at his door, he almost ignored it.
But then he heard a familiar voice. Daniel?
It's me. He hesitated, then opened the door.
His mother stood there, composed but gentle.
She didn't scold. She didn't lecture. She simply stepped inside. I made soup, she said softly, holding a container. You probably haven't eaten. Daniel's throat tightened. Why are you here? Because you're my son, Evelyn replied simply.
No mistake changes that. He sank onto the couch, staring at the floor.
You should hate me. Evelyn sat beside him.
I was hurt. I was angry. But hate? No, you're still the boy Richard and I raised.
You've lost your way. But you can find it again. Daniel's voice cracked.
I ruined everything.
The company, my life, even you. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. You can rebuild.
But only if you face what you've done. Fully and honestly.
No shortcuts.
No excuses.
He nodded slowly, tears brimming in his eyes.
2 days later, Evelyn summoned a private meeting in her study.
Present were Mark, Emily, Helen Brooks, and William Foster.
Daniel sat quietly at the edge, humbled. No longer the arrogant man who once dismissed his mother. Mark opened the discussion.
Lucas is on the move.
We traced funds flowing into an account tied to an alias he used in Singapore.
He's preparing to strike back, Emily added. If he leaks false documents showing insolvency, it could tank investor confidence.
Stock could crash within days. Evelyn looked around the room.
Then we prepare countermeasures.
Mark, keep your surveillance active. Emily, prepare verified financial statements, every number backed, every claim supported. Helen, ensure legal filings are airtight. Foster, rally the board behind our public statement. Daniel hesitated, then spoke quietly.
And me? All eyes turned to him. He swallowed hard. What can I do? Evelyn studied him for a long moment. You can tell the truth.
To law enforcement. To regulators.
You give them everything Lucas made you sign. Every meeting, every phone call.
You cooperate fully.
Daniel nodded.
I will.
Good, Evelyn said. Because redemption requires more than words.
It requires courage. That evening, Evelyn sat with Daniel on the back porch of her home. The night air was cool. The crickets singing in the garden.
For a while, they sat in silence, sipping tea. Finally, Daniel spoke. Do you remember when Dad taught me to drive? Evelyn smiled faintly. He was more nervous than you. Daniel chuckled softly.
I remember him saying, a car is like life.
Stay focused, hands steady, and don't let fear control the wheel. His smile faded.
I let fear drive me, Mother. And it took me off the road. Evelyn touched his hand.
Then take the wheel back. It's not too late. The next day, Evelyn stood before the press, flanked by board members. Her voice was clear, her presence commanding. Carter Motors has faced challenges.
But let me assure you, we are strong, we are stable, and we are moving forward with integrity.
Attempts were made to compromise this company through fraudulent activities.
Those responsible have been removed and will be held accountable. To our employees, investors, and partners, this is not the end of Carter Motors.
This is a new beginning. The cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Evelyn answered with calm confidence, offering clarity without revealing the private battle still unfolding with Lucas behind her. Daniel watched quietly.
For the first time, he felt not like a leader, but like a student.
And his teacher was his mother. That night, Mark called with urgent news. Lucas is still in the city. He hasn't fled.
My contact saw him meeting with one of the foreign investors. The man with the scar.
They're planning something, Evelyn.
Something bigger than just corporate sabotage. Evelyn tightened her grip on the phone.
Then we end this once and for all. Lucas won't destroy Carter Motors, and he won't destroy Daniel.
Not while I'm still standing. She hung up,
her eyes blazing with determination. Richard's photo caught her gaze from across the room. She whispered, "We've come this far. Now we finish it," and deep down, Evelyn knew the real battle with Lucas was still to come. The storm Evelyn had been waiting for finally broke. It started with whispers in the market, quiet rumors that spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, headlines screamed, Carter Motors under investigation for fraud. Stock prices began to dip, and nervous investors started calling. Mark slammed the morning paper on Evelyn's desk. Lucas. Evelyn scanned the article. Anonymous sources, leaked documents, accusations of financial manipulation. All designed to destroy trust. Emily rushed in, pale and shaken. The documents he leaked, they're forgeries. But they look real. My team is already getting calls from auditors. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath. He's fast. Faster than I thought. Mark leaned forward. Do we go public with what we have? The recordings, the evidence? Not yet, Evelyn said firmly. If we play everything now, Lucas slips through and resurfaces later. We need to trap him, force him into the open, so there's no escape. Daniel entered the room quietly. He looked tired but determined. Mother, I'll testify. I'll tell the truth about everything Lucas made me do. If that clears the company, I'll do it. Evelyn studied him carefully. His voice carried guilt, but also courage. That may be exactly what we need, she said softly. Later that day, Evelyn called for a crisis meeting with the board. Tension filled the room. Investors are demanding answers, Foster said. If we don't act, confidence will collapse. We act, Evelyn replied. Tomorrow morning, we'll hold a press conference. Daniel will speak publicly. He'll admit his mistakes, expose Lucas, and explain how Carter Motors is moving forward. Gasps rippled through the room. Expose your own son? One member asked. Not expose, Evelyn corrected sharply. Redeem. Transparency is the only way forward. This company survives on truth, not lies. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but nodded. I'll do it. That night, Evelyn received a phone call. The number was blocked. She answered carefully. Double quotes, Mrs. Carter. A familiar smooth voice drawled. Lucas. Her spine stiffened. You're running out of moves. On the contrary, Lucas said. I've barely started. You think a press conference will save you? I have documents, recordings, witnesses. I can bury your son forever. Evelyn's voice was calm. You already forged my signature. Do you think I won't reveal that? Lucas chuckled. Maybe people believe you. Maybe they don't. But Daniel? He's weak. He's guilty. And weak men make perfect scapegoats. Her jaw tightened. What do you want? I want what I always wanted, Lucas replied. Control. Step aside, Evelyn. Sign over your shares and I'll let Daniel walk away free. Refuse and your son rots in prison. The line went dead. Evelyn sat in silence, her mind racing. This was Lucas's most dangerous play. He wasn't just after Carter Motors anymore. He wanted her heart, her son. The next morning, Mark burst into the study, his expression grim. Lucas moved first. He filed a complaint with federal regulators, accusing Carter Motors of systemic fraud. And he named Daniel as the architect. Emily followed close behind, holding fresh papers. It's detailed. Too detailed. He had access to our systems before we locked him out. He twisted real data with forgeries. Daniel's face went pale. Then it's true. I'll be indicted. Prison. No, Evelyn said firmly. You'll stand up and tell the truth. And Lucas will expose himself in the process. The press conference was packed. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters scribbled in notebooks, microphones pointed like weapons. Evelyn stood at the podium, Daniel beside her, Mark just behind. She spoke first. Carter Motors has faced serious accusations. We do not hide from them. We confront them with honesty. Today, my son Daniel will speak directly to you. Daniel stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. He took a deep breath. I made mistakes, he said clearly. I gambled. I borrowed money. And I let the wrong man into my life, Lucas Grant. He promised help, but he used my weakness to manipulate me. He forged documents, laundered money, and tried to steal Carter Motors.
I was blind, but I see now. And I will cooperate fully with law enforcement to bring him down. The room exploded with questions.
Reporters shouted over one another. Daniel stood firm, answering as best he could, admitting fault but pointing to Lucas as the orchestrator.
When Evelyn stepped back to the podium, her voice carried steel.
Carter Motors will not be destroyed by corruption. We are stronger than one man's greed. We will cooperate with every investigation, and we will emerge stronger. The crowd erupted with flashes and questions. But Evelyn saw something else: hope.
Investors watching from afar would see not weakness, but courage. But Lucas wasn't finished. That very evening, as Evelyn drove home, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. A black SUV followed her for miles, too close, too deliberate. Mark, driving, noticed it too.
We're being tailed. The SUV accelerated, swerving dangerously close.
Evelyn's pulse quickened.
Hold steady, she said. Mark pulled into a side street.
Then another, then cut sharply into a parking garage. The SUV followed but lost them in the maze of levels. When they finally stopped, Evelyn exhaled slowly.
Lucas has moved from corporate games to intimidation.
That means he's desperate. Mark nodded grimly. Which means he's dangerous. Back at the house, Daniel paced restlessly.
This is my fault. He's targeting you because of me.
No,
Evelyn said firmly.
He's targeting me because I stood up to him.
Don't confuse the two.
This isn't about your weakness anymore. It's about his desperation. She placed a hand on his shoulder.
The only way to end this is to finish what we started.
We'll bring him into the light, where he can't hide. The following day, Mark's contacts delivered a breakthrough.
We've traced Lucas's safe house, he told Evelyn.
Abandoned warehouse by the docks.
He's meeting the scarred investor there tonight. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Then tonight, we end it. Daniel shook his head.
You can't.
He's dangerous. These aren't just businessmen, they're criminals.
I know,
Evelyn said.
That's why we're not going in unprepared. She looked at Mark. Call your law enforcement contacts.
Tonight, they get everything.
Evidence, witnesses, location. We'll give them the trap. Mark nodded.
It'll be risky.
But if it works, Lucas won't slip away this time. Evelyn turned to Daniel.
You asked how to redeem yourself. This is it. You'll come with me. You'll face him, not as his pawn, but as his accuser. You'll show him you're no longer afraid.
Daniel swallowed hard, then nodded. I'll do it. That night, the docks were quiet, shadows stretching long across the water. Evelyn stood with Daniel and Mark at a distance, watching the warehouse glow faintly with light.
Inside, Lucas and the scarred investor argued in sharp voices. Law enforcement officers crouched in the shadows, waiting for the signal. Evelyn's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. This is it. Stay close. Stay strong.
She looked at Daniel, her eyes fierce but kind.
Your father once said that sometimes the hardest lesson is the one we teach ourselves.
Tonight, Daniel, you prove you've learned it. He nodded, his jaw tight.
For the first time in years, he felt not like a boy chasing shadows, but like a man ready to stand.
The night was heavy with silence at the docks, broken only by the distant cry of seagulls and the low hum of ships anchored offshore.
The warehouse loomed like a dark skeleton against the water, its broken windows glowing faintly from the light inside.
Evelyn Carter stood at a distance with Daniel and Mark, her coat pulled tight against the chill. Mark adjusted the small earpiece connected
to the law enforcement team stationed nearby. Units are in place.
Once we have enough, they'll move in. Evelyn's gaze never left the warehouse.
Lucas won't go down quietly.
He'll try to twist this, to escape like smoke.
We need him cornered.
Daniel shifted beside her, nervous energy vibrating in his movements. What if he sees us before they move? What if he runs?
Evelyn turned to him, her voice steady.
Then we make sure he doesn't. Tonight, Daniel, you look him in the eye. You show him you're no longer afraid. That's the only way this ends. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight,
though fear still flickered in his eyes. Inside the warehouse, Lucas paced in front of a long metal table stacked with documents, laptops, and cash. The scarred investor sat opposite him, smoking a cigar, his eyes cold and unblinking. "You promised control of the company," the investor growled. "Instead, the old woman outmaneuvers you, and the boy grows a spine."
Are we wasting our time here?
Lucas forced a smile, though tension creased his forehead. "Patience. Evelyn Carter may think she's won, but I still hold enough leverage to bury her son. Once he's gone, she fold. And when she does, the company will be ours again." Outside, Mark whispered into his mic. "We've got enough." They're admitting intent. "Officers moving in on my signal." Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. "Not yet. He hasn't revealed everything."
Let him talk.
"Let Daniel hear it." Mark hesitated, then nodded. Evelyn stepped forward from the shadows, her heels clicking softly on the concrete. Daniel followed reluctantly, his heart pounding.
While Mark flanked them protectively, Lucas froze when he saw them enter, his smile vanishing.
Well, the queen herself. And her fallen prince. The scarred investor's eyes narrowed. "You brought them here?"
Lucas shook his head quickly.
"No, they're not supposed to be."
Evelyn's voice cut through the tension, calm but sharp.
"You've run out of places to hide, Lucas. The police are listening."
"Every word you say tonight is another nail in your coffin." Lucas laughed, though it sounded hollow.
"You think I'm afraid of the police? I've buried stronger men than them. And you, Evelyn, you've made a grave mistake walking in here." Mark's hand hovered near his concealed weapon,
but Evelyn raised her hand slightly.
"No violence. Not tonight. Tonight, we end this with truth." She turned to Daniel. "Tell him." Daniel swallowed hard, then stepped forward. His voice trembled at first, but grew steadier with each word. "I was your pawn, Lucas. You fed my weakness, you used my fear, and you made me sign away my future. But I'm done.
I'll testify against you."
"I'll give them everything." Lucas's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, boy. Without me, you're nothing but a disgraced gambler with a criminal record waiting to happen."
Daniel met his gaze, for once unflinching.
"Without you, I still have a chance. With you, I have none." Evelyn's heart swelled with both pain and pride. Her son was finally standing on his own. The scarred investor rose, tossing his cigar aside. "This is a waste of time. We cut ties now." Lucas grabbed his arm. "No, don't walk away."
"I still have leverage." The mother forged signatures, the son signed deals.
They're both complicit. Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes blazing.
"Those documents are forgeries, and you know it?"
"I will prove it in court, in front of the world."
"You've underestimated me from the start, Lucas. You thought I was weak."
"But you made one mistake leaving me in the rain. You woke something you can't put back to sleep." Lucas sneered, but his composure cracked. "You think anyone cares about the truth? Money wins. Power wins." And before he could finish, the warehouse doors burst open. Armed officers flooded in, shouting commands. "Hands up! Now!" The scarred investor cursed, reaching for his jacket, but officers were on him in seconds. He was forced to the ground, his cigar crushed beneath a boot. Lucas, however, didn't move at first. He stood frozen, his eyes darting between Evelyn, Daniel, and the officers. Finally, he raised his hands, his smile returning faintly. "You win this round, Evelyn," he said coolly. "But wars aren't won in a single night." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "This isn't a war. It's justice. And tonight, justice belongs to Richard's legacy, to Carter Motors, and to my son." The officers cuffed Lucas, reading him his rights. As they dragged him away, his eyes locked with Evelyn's one last time. Full of venom but also of defeat. When the warehouse finally cleared, Daniel slumped against a crate, his body shaking. Evelyn knelt beside him, cupping his face in her hands. "You did it," she whispered. "You faced him. You chose truth." Tears slipped down Daniel's cheeks. "I don't deserve forgiveness," Forgiveness isn't given because you deserve it, Evelyn said softly. It's given because love is stronger than mistakes.
And I love you, Daniel. Always. He broke down, sobbing into her shoulder, years of guilt pouring out.
Evelyn held him tightly, her own tears mingling with his.
For the first time since Richard's death, she felt hope not just for the company,
but for her son's soul. Back at headquarters the next day, Evelyn called an emergency board meeting.
With Lucas in custody and the investors under arrest, she laid everything on the table: proof of the fraud, the forged signatures,
the laundering scheme. This company has been scarred, she told them, her voice clear. But scars are not weakness.
They are reminders of survival.
Carter Motors will rise stronger, because we will never again allow greed to define us. The board erupted in applause. Employees across the building cheered when word spread that the nightmare was over.
For the first time in months, Carter Motors felt alive again. Daniel,
seated quietly at the end of the table, looked at his mother with gratitude and awe. He had fallen hard, but she had not let him be lost forever. That evening, Evelyn returned home. She sat in Richard's study, the quiet familiar, the memories heavy but comforting. She poured herself a glass of wine and whispered to the photo on the desk. It's done, Richard. We saved the company. We saved Daniel.
I hope I made you proud. In the silence, she felt him there, as if his steady hand still rested on hers.
And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to exhale fully, to rest, knowing the storm had passed.
But she also knew storms would come again, different faces, different battles.
That was life. And she would meet them as she always had, with courage, with love, and with unbreakable strength. Because Evelyn Carter was not just a widow. She was a warrior.
And nothing, no betrayal, no storm, no enemy would ever break her again. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered.
The warehouse confrontation, Lucas's arrest, the boardroom victory, it all felt like a lifetime packed into a few days. For Evelyn Carter, the hardest part was not the fight itself.
It was what came after, rebuilding. Carter Motors was battered, but not broken.
The company had weathered scandals before, but never one so close to the family.
Employees whispered in the halls, uncertain about the future.
Investors hovered, waiting for reassurance.
And Daniel, her son, was still piecing himself back together.
Learning how to stand again after falling so far. Evelyn knew this was the real test. Her first act as interim
chair was to gather the employees.
She stood on the stage of the company auditorium, facing hundreds of faces: engineers, designers, line workers, executives.
These were the people who had given their sweat and years to Carter Motors.
They deserved the truth. I won't pretend the past months have been easy, she began, her voice steady, echoing through the room.
We faced betrayal, manipulation, and fear. But through it all, one thing has remained constant: your dedication.
Carter Motors is not just a company. It's a family. And families don't abandon each other. The crowd was silent, eyes fixed on her. We will rebuild, Evelyn continued. Not with shortcuts, not with lies,
but with integrity, the same foundation Richard and I built this company on decades ago. You have my word. Carter Motors will not just survive.
It will thrive. Applause rose, soft at first, then swelling like a wave. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn saw hope in their eyes. Behind the scenes, she worked tirelessly with Mark, Emily, and Helen Brooks. Together, they drafted new compliance measures, strengthened oversight, and put safeguards in place to ensure no outsider could ever manipulate the company again. Mark coordinated with law enforcement to keep tabs on Lucas's trial. He's facing federal charges, Mark reported one evening in the study. Wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy. With the evidence we gave them, he's not getting out soon. Good, Evelyn said, though her heart carried no joy. Justice is not revenge. It's balance. Emily smiled faintly. And the balance is finally shifting back. Daniel's balance, however, was harder to restore. He spent his days in meetings with investigators, recounting every mistake, every signature, every phone call with Lucas. At night,
He often sat in Evelyn's kitchen, silent,
staring into his tea. One evening, Evelyn joined him, pulling out the old family photo albums. She opened to a page where a young Daniel, no older than 10, grinned proudly beside a car he and Richard had restored together. "You loved that car," she said.
softly. Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile. "We stayed up all night painting it. Dad wouldn't let me quit, even when I was tired.
He said, "If you quit halfway, you'll never see the beauty of what you started." Evelyn touched his hand. "That's where you are now, Daniel. Halfway. You can choose to quit, or you can finish the work of rebuilding yourself." Tears welled in his eyes.
"Do you really think I can? After everything?"
"I don't just think it," Evelyn said firmly. "I believe it.
Because you're my son. Because Richard's blood runs in you.
And because I see the man you're becoming. The man who finally took responsibility." Daniel lowered his head, emotion choking his voice. "Thank you, Mother, for not giving up on me." Months passed. Slowly, Carter Motors regained its footing. Investors returned. Employees rallied. New projects launched, infused with the spirit of resilience Evelyn had ignited. Daniel worked quietly,
Not as CEO, but in a supporting role.
Evelyn had insisted on it. "You're not ready to lead," she told him gently. "But you're ready to learn again. Start from the ground up.
Earn back their trust, and your own."
To his credit, Daniel agreed.
He began working with the design team, rediscovering the joy of creation rather than the weight of authority. For the first time in years, Evelyn saw him smile without pretense.
One evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, Evelyn and Daniel sat on the balcony of her home. The air was cool, the horizon painted in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever think about Dad?" Daniel asked quietly. "Every day," Evelyn replied. "Especially now. I hear his voice in the choices I make, the lessons I pass to you." "He's still here, Daniel. Not in body, but in spirit." Daniel swallowed hard.
"I wish I could tell him I'm sorry." "You don't have to," Evelyn said softly.
"He knew your heart, and he trusted me to guide you back. That's what we've done together." For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the sunset.
Then Evelyn spoke again.
"You left me in the rain, Daniel."
"But that moment didn't break me. It reminded me who I am. And it reminded you who you still can be."
Sometimes the hardest lessons come wrapped in pain.
But they're still lessons.
And we've both learned. Daniel's eyes glistened. He nodded slowly, his voice steady. "Then let's make sure we never forget it." Later that night, Evelyn returned to Richard's study. The room no longer felt like a shrine to loss, but a living space filled with purpose. She poured herself a glass of wine and whispered to his photograph, just as she had so many times before. "We did it, Richard. The company is safe. Daniel is healing, and I
found my strength again.
You were right. I was always the strategist.
But I couldn't have done it without you." She sat back,
exhaling deeply, a sense of peace washing over her. The rain began to fall softly outside, tapping against the windows. Evelyn stood and walked to the porch, watching the drops dance on the pavement. She didn't flinch, didn't shy away. Instead, she stepped into the rain,
lifting her face to the sky, because rain no longer meant
abandonment. It meant renewal. It meant cleansing. It meant a new beginning. Evelyn Carter had been left in the storm, but she had walked out stronger, unbroken, unafraid. And now, as the rain fell gently around her, she knew nothing, and no one could ever put her back in the shadows again.